Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now Next Later for Monday, August 4th. We always give a few seconds for the attendees to come over from the waiting room into the live broadcast. We always love when you join us live. So thank you for the folks and the viewers that come in and put questions in the chat and talk to us during the show. Today will be a great show to put questions in the chat. Paul and I are going to be talking about a variety of tactical issues in the industry, as well as high level next steps for product innovation, for product development, for strategy. This is the show where we try to give you enough information to make the choice about what's next, whether you're deciding something for after Labor Day, whether you're deciding something for the next quarter, or whether you're deciding something for the next year. Hopefully, you hear something on this show that helps you make that decision. And so, we're going to focus today a lot on technology and product development around AI specifically, but also what we're hearing from lenders and what the feedback has been. We've got a lot going on in the industry. So today's a really good show to wrap that together and start to plan ahead for the second half of the year. So, Paul, thank you for joining us on Now Next Later. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. It'll be fun to spark this conversation with you, my friend.
Yes, thank you. So, as you listen to us chat, or as you listen to us talk, I keep an eye on the chat. So, if something comes up, here's what we're going to try to do today. I really wanted to start in the now with some tactical and advocacy issues that seem to have everybody talking, but then also, compare that against how do we prioritize it with these bigger, more existential issues of operations and cost and AI. So, we're going to start in the now by doing a little compare and contrast today. And then we'll move more into the next and the later as we plan ahead on some of the things we think the industry should be doing and that we think you should be doing as tech companies and as lenders. So be ready with those questions. I'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. So, Paul, I'll kick it off there. When I said the tactical issues and the advocacy issues against the big existential issues, I was hoping to frame it up with you this way, which is I've seen a lot about FICO, credit fees, credit reports, buy merge, try merge, Vantage score. And we need to talk a lot about that. We had Tracy from Credit Plus on here to talk about what are the implications to your business, what should you be thinking about. And there are bigger innovation potential in that space. I don't want to diminish that. It
Mhm.
also feels like we're arguing about $5, $7, $13. What about this thing? What about this thing? And we could be talking about and advocating for much larger levers that really start changing the game for LOs, for real estate agents, and for consumers. And then
Consumer.
second, we just heard this weekend about this, trigger lead bill, also in the credit space a bit, because the credit bureaus and the credit reporting agencies are the ones that generate those leads by and large and sell them. But again, these kind of like niche leads in a part of our business, consumer direct definitely relies on them. People do good business off of them, but this is not changing the game for the future of mortgage or home ownership, right? This is a small change. And then on the other side, all day, every day, lenders have this onslaught of AI can do this and AI is going to take your job. And why aren't you updating your business faster? And so today, I just want to make a little sense of that. I want to kind of parse that out and decide like where are the priorities going? Are we looking at the right stuff? And what should lenders be deciding, as we move forward? So with that framework, what have you been hearing from your customers, from the people you talk to, and how do we make sense of this?
But yeah, that's a great topic of conversation. I think what I'd like to do is look at it more broadly. And so you're talking about these little tiny steps, right? And do those little tiny steps matter? I think they do when you're talking about, let's take a look at credit, right? We all know that there's a need for revamping credit, like the reporting bureaus, how they come up with credit scores. That in itself is super outdated. That algorithm doesn't suit who us as consumers are anymore. And so when you look at the trigger leads and talk about the cost of credit, I think it is important to look at those baby steps as long as those baby steps are leading to an ultimate real change, a significant
Hmm.
change that's going to change the industry. You had also mentioned AI. I don't want to sidetrack from your question, but it's kind of interesting how AI slammed into our industry and every other industry. It kind of came out of the blue, so to speak, from a
Hmm.
B2B perspective. And it really has something that's been around for a while. So I think when you talk about, and this isn't necessarily to argue what you were saying, Mr. Potter, because I'd never do that.
That's
But,
no, that's
I
what I
think
want to happen. We're good.
yeah. So I think sometimes those baby steps are important because I think it kind of dribbles in what's about to change, right? So
Hmm.
it
Yep.
kind of leads to what the end game changes. So if we have an end game change, so relating to the trigger leads or the cost of credit,
Hmm.
um, which might coincide down the road, and we just don't see that. I think it's important to have these little baby step changes occurring, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So what I hope happens is that we've seen from lenders, and I see it all the time with, at Prudent AI, we talk about wanting to support the consumer and the lender with shifting left and giving certainty and verification at very top of funnel as soon as the app's coming in. And we have conversations with lenders. Does that happen when credit's pulled? Well, can it happen before credit's pulled so we can look at the income and know, kind of have an idea as to, is this a solid borrower for that home purchase price? So
Hmm.
looking at the consumer from what I've heard, lenders are wanting to look at the consumer as much as possible before having the credit pulled. And I think
Hmm.
that's for reasons of cost and then reasons of those trigger leads. So that to answer your question, that's what I've been hearing and seeing in my world.
So that's a great way to frame it up. Is the change that may seem small or incremental to a degree actually a change that is on the right path to a functionality that would make, is your endpoint or is your strategic milestone? So with I'm going to take it to the credit scoring and credit reporting. These are these targeted changes. We want to save a little money here or there on the report because we hate sort of the death by a thousand cuts of all the costs going up here and there. So we got to take the ones we can lower, or we got to take the ones we can challenge when we can and lower them. And that will be important because the next change we want to make is more fundamental, let's say, to how credit gets pulled and where credit gets pulled. And we can't make that change unless we start making progress down that path. So that's a great way to illustrate a small incremental change that can still get us where we're trying to go. And then where we're trying to go is a place I'd love to talk about, because my view of the trigger leads topic, and again, I put in the chat for everybody, one of the reasons we're talking about is that if you were a lender, if you were a tech company and you look across LinkedIn and advocacy and the journalism that the industry is doing, what are the things you'd hear about today? There's really three. And so we wanted to talk about that. And the one for the trigger leads that I wanted to bring up was just, it felt to me like a non-issue, to be honest. I'll just be candid. It felt to me like we're going to find a way to get consent from the consumer. We're going to find a way to tell people why it's valuable that they share and market their information to keep that lead generation ecosystem going. And that's not because I'm advocating for that. That's not because I'm working on that. I'm just saying once you have a infrastructure built to generate consumer leads off of different sources and funnel them in to buyers of those leads who pay a lot for them, the
Yeah.
fact that we're going to cut these trigger leads out, I think is only going to move some of the question to the consumer of when they consent to eventually have their lead marketed. It isn't actually going to change that their lead is marketed, if that makes sense. So to me, this is not necessarily as big a deal. I'm interested to watch. I'm curious. I'm keeping an open mind. I'm not pessimistic about it by any stretch, because I am curious. But I think it's actually just going to force lead generators to just be a little bit more transparent and embed that consent in a place that says to consumers, hey, I'm going to ask you a year from now if you want a good deal. Can you consent? And I'll just present you those offers then. And that will create almost essentially the same thing as a trigger lead, just getting them to say yes when they join your platform instead of never asking them and just selling it. And I think those types of things, maybe people get a little bit more savvy on not giving consent, and that does change the ecosystem. There's always a little transition. But to me, that's what sort of I felt we were looking at with that bill, was just like, oh, we're going to shift around the presentation of consent rather than actually change lead flow. But I'll say a big but to what you said, which is regardless, regardless of whether that happens, regardless of whether trigger leads completely go away or get revamped or lead generators get more sophisticated. Regardless, we have a problem that we need to solve, which is it's expensive to nurture. And we want to get up above the transaction moment. We want to get as far ahead left, as you said, of the 1003. And we want to do it in a cost effective way. How do we do it?
Yeah.
So that's really the question here is like, does Trigger Leads give you or an entrepreneur or anybody watching the opportunity to say, oh, now's the time for us to deploy this solution or this solution to help us move left, to help us nurture in a cost effective way so that we're sharing value and that lead doesn't go shopping in the traditional sense, Google, when it comes time for them to transact. So, what does that look like as you're working on it, adding tools, hearing from lenders? I guess the the best way I could ask is how far left have we moved, and where do you see us going in the next few months? And yeah.
I mean, it's funny. So you asked like how far left have we moved? And I think there's a, there has to be I think you use this phrase, there has to be a fundamental change. And what I've liked most that I've heard in the industry is technology companies trying to empower the borrower with their understanding as to what their borrowing power is. And that plays in line with, a lot of technology companies that we've both dealt with, including Prudent AI and Form Free and Account Check and Trained AI. All those companies are really their focus is to give that empowerment at top of funnel so that there's an understanding as to where can that consumer go and giving that consumer that information. I think that we haven't moved the needle enough to play into that yet, right? Those are all concepts. And I think what happens when that when there are concepts, then under those concepts you have an understanding that there's a need for it. Does that make sense? So
Mm-hmm.
if
Mm-hmm.
there's a concept and there's a need for it, then it's just more about what does it take to get the industry a mind shift change so that the industry and the consumer understand those two pivotal points, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense. And so I think that's where we are right now. So I think we're in this place of understanding that maybe credit does need to be revamped a little bit. What's being reported, those algorithms that are created to create that credit report, and when is that credit pulled, and how much knowledge does the consumer really have, and can the consumer carry that to the lender so that it's not these lenders that are pulling credit and the trigger leads are getting triggered and things of that nature. So,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we're there yet with adoption, but we're there with ideas, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's
Yeah.
enough technology out there that speak about solutions that can support this shift left concept and empowering the borrower. But I think now we have to focus on a mind shift, a
Mm-hmm.
shift in mindset, I should say. And that lies with our industry because we're the ones that carry out what the need is to the consumer. We're the ones that tell the consumer what is needed and when it's needed.
Yeah, that is a great. I've been calling it at the top of the show kind of an existential question, but actually it's more of a strategic question that's going to come faster and faster than ever. So you mentioned how we had all these priorities, and then AI suddenly got really ubiquitous really fast. OpenAI kind of held back their algorithm, held back their model, held it back, held it back, held it back, and then kind of exploded it publicly. And then when they made that available with like a consumer facing app, that I think was one of the catalysts because then everyone else either had to reveal theirs or catch up. And so you're right, it came to our industry as a wave in that. And what you're saying is, all right, now we have these two things coming together. We have all the trends we have been talking about, all these trends around cost, supply and demand, first time home buyers, nurturing, getting your lead funnel all shored up and bigger, frankly. And we have all of those things on the demographic side and the market side crashing together with this wave of AI. And one of the things that you mentioned is when as that crash is happening, who's going to control what? And that I
Mhm.
think is the bigger piece of this is the credit bureau now losing control because fintech tools and lenders and platforms, frankly, have figured out a way to create more of that, solid up funnel flow so that it doesn't just become a regular old lead or that credit bureau is controlling almost all of the gates and access for both the consumer and the industry. That's pretty exciting because you and I have been talking about that for a decade now, I think,
Yeah, yeah,
or,
yeah.
or more. And if we were going to try to accelerate that, so back to the original theme here, now we're in the next category pretty firmly, and we want to take these incremental changes and we want to accelerate them. But the acceleration has its own incremental value. I was talking to a CEO of an IMB recently who was sort of saying the big difference between how fast you can change your business between two IMBs is how much top down control exists, either from culturally or from a technology perspective. So the more the sort of CEO champion or the sales champion says, this is how we do it, this is
Hmm.
our
Hmm.
model, this is what we do, you can change management goes a lot faster in that IMB because everybody's on board typically. And those waves of change, those waves of control tend to just continue to roll out. You've got a process, you continue to roll them out. You make a misstep here and there with a choice. Maybe we try a vendor, we try a product, but ultimately, those are the ones that can change the fastest. And the IMBs who have regional control, distributed control, or allow salespeople to have more flexibility, have a harder time with change management, or have higher costs managing a bunch of different systems that are doing very very similar things. And so, what I've noticed is that usually is just a size question. Tends to be it's really just like how big is the lender? The bigger they are, the less
Yeah.
control they have. Smaller, uh, the more control they have. But the other trend that's happening is everybody's trying to get bigger because we're seeing the consolidation. We're seeing loan officers have to find a home that is feeling more secure to them. And
Yeah.
so I think your point is well made that we at least when I joined the mortgage industry, the point was like get ready for a lot of change, right? It was just after the global financial crisis. I was a lawyer at that point, and so it was like get ready for volatility, get ready for change. All we know in this industry is change. So I'm not saying this is new territory. I'm just saying that the speed and the size of this change, the volatility is more dramatic today. And I think you've backed that up and said, look, people you're talking to, they're juggling how to do all these things all at the same time from the little incremental change to that big shift left to this. I now have to manage whatever I'm supposed to be doing with AI because I feel a lot of pressure around it, and then
Yeah.
make a 2026 budget and strategic roadmap off of that in the next, call it 3 months.
Yeah, it's funny because when you opened up, we were talking about later, and I love the idea, if you can believe it or not already, is planning for what's going to happen in 26 because we're approaching our fourth quarter, right? Um, and one other note I would like to throw in there that might bring us to the next segment.
Mm,
I love watching this podcast or listening to this podcast from John Chambers. He was the ex-CEO at Cisco Systems, and he was there when I was working in the investor relations department. And he was talking about AI in an article, and then brought that to his podcast in December. And he equated the AI transition or movement to, what happened when the World Wide Web came to market, right? When the internet came about. And he equated it to the exact same change. And he summed it up with this great bow, if you will, in the package and said, we get to sit back and say, what is possible? And I think that's really
mhm,
interesting right now as it relates to where our consumer is, where our industry is, where we are socially, economically, and politically. And we get to look at the usability of AI and help it transcend what the housing industry could be for all consumers, not just the consumers
mhm.
that are moving up or buying a second home, but consumers that are stepping in. And I think that if we utilize it how I believe it was meant to be utilized and how a lot of industries are utilizing AI as a technology as a support mechanism. So when it first hit like a year ago, right, when it first onslaughted into the industry, everybody was afraid about it taking jobs, much like they were when DU and LP came about, that
Yeah.
underwriters were going to vanish. I heard, I wasn't in the industry at that time. Um, but it's really interesting to see it move into having these conversations of no. It's a tool and mechanism to support the individuals that are working and doing function so that those individuals can concentrate more on relationships and being a little bit more analytical as opposed to crunching data, crunching numbers, looking at data, and being paper pushers. So,
Hmm.
as we talk about these little, going back to what you were talking about now, as we talk about these little nuggets of tiny footsteps that are allowing you to be able to walk and then you can
Hmm.
run and get to your goal. I think the technology of AI can be used for that. And I believe what lenders are starting to see, I've heard this from three strong large IMBs. One of them have just gone through one of those large mergers and acquisitions that you were talking about. What they're starting to do now is put test pods together for technology
Hmm.
and letting their
Nice.
team members trial run technology for 30 days and see which one works best for their workflow. And so I'm seeing a lot of lender IMBs start to get really savvy with the usability of AI. And I'm hearing more and more of, well, what do you see X lender doing, Paul? What do you see Y lender doing? We want to hybrid that type thing.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. I'm taking notes here because I think you hit on two really critical things. One, we've been a big advocate on Now Next Later to say when technology is adopted most quickly, new technology and AI and falls in that category, is adopted most quickly is when it makes experts more effective. That has always been, it makes your team, your experts more effective. When that is the solution, we always see it go farther, faster. And what you're saying is you got to really dial in who you're helping with which version and then test and go, right?
Yeah.
Find the thing that is like the highest value is going to be here, here, and here. I got to figure out a way to test them. I got to figure out a way to get it in, and then I got to tell everybody else about it. It sounds easy, I know the way we say it, and I understand people listening, especially lenders listening, are going to go, "That's way harder than you're making it sound." We know it's harder, but that is actually how it works. Is you
Yeah.
find the smallest entry point for the highest return for your experts. And if we're talking about salespeople here, when we move left, that's really what we're talking about. It's been hard to nurture leads. I remember when I was at Rocket, I mean, we weren't really even talking more than 60 days, right? Like it was, and in many, and that's a refi shop at the time that was moving into becoming, a more holistic lender and platform. But it was, 60 days was like the oldest you would even talk about. It was like 30, 35 days was the longest, really. And I think a lot of other lenders were similar. I just don't have the capability and the time to be working with someone for a really long time. Whereas now, people are saying AI is going to be, behind the scenes doing all the things I wanted it to do and doing it in my voice, my personality, my company's policies and procedures or strategy. So if we're thinking about adoption, what I'm hearing is you can find that you have more of that command and control of change management as a senior leader using AI, and you can win as a salesperson, MLO, operator in the field using AI to really make your time more efficient so that company's more effective and efficient and consistent. And I am doing only the things I know are going to generate, but I haven't lost the ability to serve everybody else, who a lot of times up until now have kind of gone into a drip campaign or have gone even into a database only to be called 6 months or a year later, maybe by a junior person to serve it back up to you. So if that happens, we're really looking at a much more consistent sales process for a lot of
Mhm.
lenders. I think more than they have today.
Yeah.
Um, when we have you on the show, a lot of times we are talking about underwriting, and a lot of times we're talking about processing and delivering data to underwriters who are high value experts, into the secondary market investors. So this is a different kind of category of efficiency. Would you say that you have a sense of where the maturity is going, or where the you like maybe maturity is not even the right word. Maybe it's just like, where's the highest um, volume of activity? Is it still in the processing operation space overall? And now we're talking about product development and innovation going into sales, or are you seeing actually sales as maybe more of the focus, and we're going to actually be talking about that catching up to operations for
Yeah.
the next 6 months? How are you seeing it?
I love that you bring that up because usually you're right. Most of my conversations with you and with others have been kind of in the middle of the loan life cycle, processing, underwriting, and then like a little post closing, utilizing AI as a functionality. But myself and the team at Prudent AI, and I know a lot of other solutions in AI have been pushing towards the sales side for that concept of shifting left. And
Hmm.
it's funny because I get on the phone with lenders and they'll flat out say to me, IMBs or wholesale lenders or those that buy correspondent closed loans or whatnot. So is your solution in the operation side or in the production side? And my response to them is always, with Prudent AI, as I'm talking about the solution, it's really for both, whoever I happen to be talking to. It can be utilized at top of funnel and roll all the way through. And I kid you not, to you, Jeremy, and everybody else on this call, that IMB and lender, wholesale lender will come back to me 2 minutes later. So wait, let me get this straight. Is it for production or is it for operations? So you have to move that needle a little bit to ensure that they understand that, if you have a tool that allows for the capabilities of what is this income, does this consumer qualify even before or potentially qualify before pulling credit or knowing what the property is, just taking a high level, what does their income look like? And can you,
Hmm.
from the onset, is this going to be non-QM or a QM file, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
That concept of a solution that can support production all the way through till the file is
Hmm.
funded or closed and bundled up and sold elsewhere, that's a foreign concept because we've
Yeah.
siloed in our industry so much of, well, a CRM is for sales and LOS is for the beginning of sales, but really, record data source and operations. And then we have other solutions for secondary and closing of a file. And I
Yeah.
think what I'm seeing an overall trend with AI is it supporting the job function of whoever is touching the file at that point in time. So you do
Hmm.
have the capabilities of bringing it top of funnel all the way through operations, one solution or one technology purpose, I should say.
Yeah, I think that is an issue that I've seen haunt us for a long time. The retouching, the re-verification,
Yeah.
the redundancy, and it didn't get solved at all, I would say, by a lot of LOS providers. Now, there are new LOS providers building it in a more collaborative way, in a more dynamic way. But that was a function, I think, of just the way we always did it from an LOS perspective in large case, and the fact this industry has always been kind of a piecing together of acronyms, right? You get the POS and the CRM working together, and it goes into the LOS. You got a PPE engine that then delivers into the capital markets. And so I think what you're saying is we're starting to see sort of fundamental shifts too in how you put together a more consistent data path that
Hmm.
is not leaping from system to system as much as we thought, or as much as we're used to, with
Or
connectivity
bridging them.
APIs and or bridging them
Yeah,
with
yeah,
tools that actually make it look like it's one to your people, even though
right.
you may have to hit the things you've already bought or are using along the way. I think that's
Yeah.
exactly right. Now, we're going to end on one kind of quick question, which is this idea of like, how much is my organization going to change? What you just said is, under the hood, it's going to change a lot. People change a lot slower than technology does. So just as like a final later thought in the future, is it the CEO's job? Is it the leader's job how are we going to make these very critical decisions about the relationship between the size of my team, the look and feel of my team, and what they do, and the fact that I've just gotten kind of more visibility, control, and consistency under the hood in the technology thanks to these emerging tools.
Yeah. I think that you have to, as a leader, I think you mentioned CEO, whatever your C-level executive that's working on what function or workflow. I think you have to trust your team who have their hands in it and roll up their sleeves and do the work.
Hmm.
But you mentioned something in the very beginning where you were talking about the larger the organization, sometimes the more messy it can be. And I think you were comparing to centralized and decentralized functionality, technology, et cetera. And
Hmm.
I, in my time at Prudent AI, I've touched on many more IMBs than I ever have in any part of my industry because that's my job. But I really enjoy it. But what I've seen, contrary to that, is those larger organizations, it might take a little bit longer to get a new workflow or technology in. Most that's usually due to like vendor management. But I think what the crux of the concept of, does it take long to get a new technology adopted or a new way of thinking? I think it aligns a little bit more with the purpose and mission of the organization. And I don't want to sound too fluffy, right, with that, but if there's like a steadfast, this is what we stand for and this is what we do, and
Hmm.
technology is looked at, solution is looked at, your roadmap is looked at, your workflow is looked at with that mission, and you stay consistent with,
Hmm.
I think regardless of your size, you can move. So that goes back to your statement of, yeah, it trickles down from your
Yep.
executive, from your CEO, but there has to be just continuous consistency from my perspective. And where I've seen the biggest failures is where the consistency is lacked and the mission is not aligned with your team
Hmm.
members.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, we always come, I think that's a great way to end the conversation, which is, you said the crux of the answer to this challenge is what is your organization about? What's the mission, purpose, and
Yeah,
goals that you've laid out? AI isn't really changing those. Those are who you are as an
yeah, yeah.
organization. And if you engage your strategic practices, your strategic process every year, I mentioned the 2026 process that's coming up. As you engage that process, AI is allowing you to measure things differently and probably allow you to hit different goals differently. But how your team accepts it, how you move them around, how you put them on harder challenges or lay them off is actually just a function of who you are as an organization. Are you one that's constantly evolving and growing and putting your people on different challenges, or not? And that'll be really interesting to watch. So unfortunately, we have to wrap here. I really, really appreciate the time. Thank you, everybody. I went a few minutes over because I was having such a good time talking to Paul on these topics, and we really appreciate you joining. We have a packed agenda. I'm putting together the guests for August, so stick with us. We'll send those out and announce those very shortly because we have a lot of this great stuff coming up. Thank you, Paul. Great to see
Thanks for
you.
having me. Good to see you
Yeah.
too.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We'll post this to YouTube as always and talk to you again next week.